It's 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. An American tourist just walked into a New Zealand dairy, looked at a glass cabinet full of meat pies, and said, "Is this a bakery or a gas station?" Because it's too good to be one, and too weird to be the other. He was wearing running shoes and a Patagonia jacket. He had a credit card in his hand and a look on his face that I can only describe as cultural vertigo. And in the next 12 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what he saw and why, by 7 a.m., he was asking me if he could move here. This is not a tourist dairy. There are no postcards, no I love NZ keychains. This is the kind of dairy that exists on a corner in every New Zealand suburb, the kind that opens at 6 a.m. because the tradies start at 7 o'clock, and closes at 7 p.m. because the owner has a family dinner to get to. At 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, this place is not quiet. It's not empty. It is the busiest room on the street. And if you're an American tourist who thinks you've seen convenience stores, if you think 7-Eleven and Wawa have prepared you for what happens here, you are about to have your entire understanding of retail, community, and breakfast completely rewritten. Because what American tourists notice first at a New Zealand dairy at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday is not one thing. It's 5 things. And each one tells you something about this country that no travel brochure ever could. Walk in at 6:45 a.m. The bell rings. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Not stale hot dogs. Not disinfectant. Fresh coffee, baking pastry, and something else. Something that smells like bread that was delivered this morning, not last Tuesday. The American tourist I was watching stood in the doorway for a solid 10 seconds. He didn't move. He just scanned the room like he was trying to figure out what kind of building he'd actually entered. Because this is not what an American convenience store looks like at dawn. In America, at 6:45 a.m., a convenience store is a fluorescent-lit cave of sadness. A rotating hot dog under a heat lamp. A slushy machine that hasn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. A cashier behind bulletproof glass who would rather be anywhere else. But here, at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, this dairy is a community living room with a cash register, and the American tourist was about to discover exactly what that means. Item 1. The name. The American tourist looked at the sign above the door, dairy, and he looked at me and he said, "I thought this was a place that sold milk." And I get it. In America, a dairy is a farm. It's a place with cows and barns and men named Earl. It is not a corner store. It is not a place where you buy phone credit, a loaf of bread, a packet of cigarettes, and a birthday card for your niece. I told him that in New Zealand, the word dairy is shorthand for the most important building in the neighborhood. It's where you buy your milk, yes, but it's also where you find out who's getting married, who's broken their arm, and which rugby team won on Saturday. It's a shop, but it's also a bulletin board, a bakery, a bank, and a therapist's office, all in a space smaller than an American studio apartment. He looked at the sign again. He shook his head, and he said, "We really need to work on our naming conventions." Item 2. The pie warmer. At 6:45 a.m., the pie warmer is the beating heart of this dairy. It's not an afterthought. It's not a sad rotating rack of hot dogs that have been there since midnight. It is a glass cathedral of pastry, and at this hour, it is being treated with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The American tourist watched a tradie in high V's buy a steak and cheese pie, a sausage roll, and a can of V. He watched this man hand over $8, receive change, and walk out into the dawn like he'd just completed a sacred ritual. And then the American tourist looked at me and said, "Is that hot food? In a convenience store? At 6 in the morning?" I told him those pies were made at 4 a.m. at a bakery 3 suburbs over. They were delivered at 6 o'clock. They will be gone by 8:30. And the man who just bought one has been eating the same pie from the same dairy every Tuesday for 11 years. The American tourist looked at the pie warmer. He looked at the tradie walking away. And he said, "In America, that man would be eating a granola bar from a vending machine and hating his life." Item 3. The $1 lolly jars. The American tourist wandered over to a wall of plastic jars filled with pineapple lumps, chocolate fish, jet planes, and something I didn't have the heart to explain called snifters. He picked up a jar, he looked at the price tag, and he laughed. Not a mean laugh, a laugh of disbelief. $1, he said. For this many? I told him that these jars are the childhood of every New Zealand kid. Saturday mornings, birthday parties, road trips to the Bach. It all starts with a paper bag, a plastic scoop, and a parent saying, "Don't get too many." He stood there for a full minute, just staring at the jars. And then he said something that I think perfectly captures the American retail experience. He said, "In the States, this much candy would cost $6. It would be in a locked case. And there would be a sign warning you about sugar." He bought a bag of pineapple lumps. He ate one in the aisle. He looked at me with his mouth full and said, "These are illegal in America. They have to be." Item 4. The coffee machine. At 6:45 a.m., the espresso machine behind the counter is not a pod machine. It is not a push-button dispenser. It is a proper, hissing, steaming, Italian-made machine that has been calibrated by someone who actually cares. The American tourist watched the owner, a woman named Sharon who has run this dairy for 19 years, make a flat white. She ground the beans. She tamped the portafilter. She steamed the milk to exactly 65 degrees. And she handed it over to a customer whose name she knew, whose order she knew, and whose kid's cricket schedule she was already asking about. The American tourist looked at the price board, $3.50. He turned to me and said, "That's a specialty coffee." I said, "That's a Tuesday." He said, "In America, that coffee is $7. It's made by a 22-year-old who spells your name wrong on purpose. And there's a tip jar that judges you." He bought one. He took a sip. He closed his eyes. And when he opened them, he said, "This is a dairy. This is a corner shop. And this is the best coffee I've had since I landed." Item 5. The counter. This is the one that breaks them. This is the one that changes everything. The American tourist walked up to pay for his pie and his lollies and his coffee, and he stopped. Because there was no self-checkout machine. There was no scan your own app. There was no insert card and remove it quickly robot voice. There was just Sharon, behind a register, smiling. She asked him where he was from. She asked him how long he was in New Zealand. She asked him if he'd tried the pineapple lumps yet. And when he said yes, she said, "Good choice," like he'd just passed a test. And then she did something that I don't think the American tourist had experienced in a retail environment in 20 years. She looked him in the eye. She handed him his change. She said, "Enjoy your day, love." And she meant it. He stood there for a second, holding his bag, looking like someone had just handed him a gift he didn't know he needed. And then he said, "In America, I would have scanned my own items, bagged my own groceries, and been asked to tip a machine. Here, a human being just asked me about my holiday." He walked out. He stopped on the pavement. He looked back at the sign, dairy, and he said, "I don't think that word means what I thought it meant." Here's what happened in that dairy in 20 minutes. An American tourist walked in, thinking he was entering a shop. He walked out realizing he'd entered a community. He didn't see a cashier. He saw Sharon. He didn't see a pie warmer. He saw a breakfast tradition that predates his arrival by decades. He didn't see $1 lollies. He saw childhood he never had. He didn't see a coffee machine. He saw craft. And he didn't see a convenience store. He saw proof that you can run a business on trust, on quality, and on knowing your neighbor's name. And the thing that broke him, the thing that actually changed his expression from confused tourist to man considering immigration, wasn't any single item. It was the realization that at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, in a country of 5 million people, on a street that doesn't make it onto any map, there is a room where human beings still act like human beings. And they sell really good pies. I've taken Americans to glaciers. I've taken them to fjords. I've taken them to rugby games and marae and mountaintops that made them cry. But I have never, not once, seen an American tourist more genuinely moved than the moment they realize what a New Zealand dairy actually is. Because a dairy is not a building. It's a promise. It's a promise that at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, when you're tired and you're hungry and you just need to get to work, someone will be there. They will know what you want. They will make it fresh. They will charge you a fair price, and they will ask you about your kids. That American tourist didn't come to New Zealand for a dairy. He came for the scenery. He came for the adventure. He came for the Instagram photos and the bungee jumps. But what he found at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, in a shop the size of a living room, with a pie warmer and a $1 lolly jar and a woman named Sharon, was something that America used to have. Something that got replaced by apps and self-checkouts and 24-hour drive-thrus. Something that New Zealand never stopped doing. He found community, He just had to buy a pie to get in. So that's it. 5 things American tourists notice first at a New Zealand dairy at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. The name, the pies, the lollies, the coffee, and the woman behind the counter who makes you feel like you belong there. If you want to see what else Americans can't handle in this country, subscribe. Because next week, we're not going to a dairy. We're going to a building site smoko, and I have an American brother-in-law who thinks he knows what a coffee break is. He doesn't. He really, really doesn't. Until then, this is KiwiVerse. See you next Friday.